Being disabled is a hard to describe experience. I was born disabled and have never known what life without a disability would be like. Growing up, I saw myself represented in many ways on TV. Blonde, blue-eyed characters were everywhere to be seen, but none of them were quite like me. I never really saw anyone who shared the same disability as me, or even any disabilities in general for the most part. Now some may say, does it really matter? And yeah, it kind of does. According to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, around 27% of Americans are disabled, but only a fraction of them are actually represented in media today. Statistics show that only 2.8% of characters in ongoing series from 2021 to 2022 were disabled. That is nothing compared to how many disabled people there actually are. Representation of marginalized groups is necessary, and I've seen disabled people be overlooked for my entire life. So today, I wanted to discuss some of the different variations of representation in animation I've seen over the years, and what I think makes good representation. Warning, this video contains opinions that may or may not align with your own. Please be kind to everyone in the comments when discussing. Also, beware of spoilers for the shows on screen right now. Also, I'm recording this while sick, so please go easy on me. So what makes good representation? Well, there's a few key things to aim for and to avoid when writing disabled characters. I don't think this will come as a shock to anyone, but the first step to making proper representation, in my opinion, is authenticity. A disabled character added to a show for the sake of representation and earning a few brownie points with your disabled viewers will never come from a place of true authenticity. Representation should come from a genuine place, not corporations looking to be more politically correct. A character written to meet a quota will never be the same as a character created from the heart, at least not in my opinion. Representation should come naturally to a character. You can't create a character and slap a gimmick on them with the hopes of making them good representation. Someone's disability shapes who they are as a person through their experiences and perspective on life. Their character should be written with that in mind. It should never come as an afterthought. Another problem I see with representation in general, not just disabilities, is stereotypes. A few common ones I particularly dislike include constantly being depressed or victimized, being seen as nothing more than an inspiration to the protagonist, the Mary Sue, or my personal least favorite, cured disabilities. Starting with the Mary Sues. There's a very strange stereotype that disabled people can do no wrong. Many people assume children are innocent and their actions will be chalked up to simple mistakes. Because a lot of people tend to infantilize disabled people, this belief applies to them as well, and personally, I hate it. Disabled people are just as capable of being horrible as able-bodied people. Now, I know it may sound strange hearing me call for better representation and then turn around and say, well, I want more disabled people to be villainous. But I think it's an important part of representation. They should be represented in both a positive and negative light, as long as them being disabled isn't where the negativity stems from. Take, for example, if we have a villain who commits horrible acts throughout the film, and at the end of the movie, they reveal themselves and their tragic backstory, and then we see that they're wheelchair bound. I think that's cool. As long as their wrongdoings aren't rooted in them being disabled, I think it's perfectly fine to portray a villain this way. They just happen to be disabled. It is not the root cause of their villainous behavior. This is all a matter of opinion, though. Moving on, I also dislike characters whose entire personality is their disability. As I said earlier, a disability shapes who you are, but it doesn't define you. I think disabled people have every right to be depressed regarding their health. I myself struggled often as a teenager, coming to terms with my own disability, but I still experienced happy moments with my friends and my family. It was those somber moments alone that I struggled. Now, everyone's experience won't be the same, but I don't like when someone's entire character is how sad they are about being disabled. To me, it feels as though they're portraying being disabled as the worst thing that could ever happen to someone. That's not true. Disabled people can live happy and fulfilling lives, and we should be portrayed that way. My personal favorite portrayal of this is Kaori Miyazano from Your Lie in April. She lived a life full of love and music and remained positive throughout her struggles, despite knowing she may die. I think this is a really heartfelt portrayal of what it's actually like to come to terms with a disability, and the show actually helped me a lot with my own struggles at my own lowest point. Building off of that, something I absolutely hate to see is when characters' disabilities are cured. If the only way for your character to live happily ever after is by being cured, I honestly don't want the representation to begin with. There are instances in which a disabled character was cured, and I felt it actually worked in the context of the story, such as Edward Elric from Fullmetal Alchemist. But generally, I don't like it. One character that this particularly stung for me with was Hunter from the Owl House. Hunter was not technically disabled, but I don't believe representation only has to be standard disabilities we have in real life. It can also be implied disabilities. He was a powerless witch in a world of magic, putting him at a disadvantage, but he overcame this and was just as capable, if not more so, than those around him. His lack of magic certainly contributed to who he was as a character, fueling many of his insecurities when we first met him, and the decisions he made in turn. But he was more than just that. This all came to an end though after season 3 episode 2, in which it was revealed that Flapjack's sacrifice had given him magic abilities. I was really torn when I watched this episode for the first time. On one hand, it only deepened his bond with Flapjack, making the sacrifice even more gut-wrenching on a rewatch. But on the other hand, it took something that I felt was so very important to Hunter as a character and stripped him of it. Now, it's not my place to say whether or not this was the right decision, but as a disabled person who looked to him for representation, I was disappointed. Now, as much as I'd love for this entire video to be about Hunter, we must focus. Another common trope that I hate is when disabled characters are there only to be an inspiration, typically for our protagonist or a plot device entirely. This is when a character's main purpose in the story is to further the plot, usually by inspiring our protagonist, or sometimes they're even here to teach the viewers a lesson. An example that comes to mind would be Rose Lavilant from Miraculous Ladybug. In season 4 episode 8, we learn that Marinette's classmate Rose has an unspecified illness. Upon learning this, her classmates, aside from Julika, all begin to treat her differently, coddling her as if she's someone who needs to be protected. When she realizes they know, there's a moment of confrontation where she tells them they shouldn't treat her differently based on her disability. I actually really enjoyed this episode and feel it was a good lesson to teach children about, but what I don't like is that it is a one-off thing. You could say this is because she specifically asked her friends not to bring it up, but there is such a thing as show don't tell. So let's brainstorm another way this could have been handled. In Miraculous Ladybug, our heroes use miraculous jewels to transform and use special abilities, but because they're not as strong as a full-grown adult yet, they detransform 5 minutes after using their powers. In the season 4 episode Guilt Trip, Rose receives the miraculous of the pig. Maybe when she's using the pig miraculous, her detransformation could occur after only 3 minutes, since it's based on how much her body can handle. In theory, she may not be able to handle as much as her fellow heroes due to her disability. This could make for interesting scenarios in which they have to rush to get her away from the fight to protect her identity, and maybe even lead to a conflict in which she has to prove herself worthy, showing that she's just as capable despite her disability. Now, that's just my own idea for how I may have handled Rose's character differently, but what do I know? I'm just some girl yapping into a mic. Anyways, another character I found very disappointing was Nephrite from Steven Universe. Introduced in season 3 episode 14, she was a corrupted gem that Steven attempted to heal. I give Steven Universe a pass from the healing trope because I feel in this context, it's not that detrimental to the characters. I personally think of corruption in a similar vein to dementia. Nephrite is introduced and used to tell us the story of the Gem War and how it resulted in the corruption of many gems. The Diamond Zone soldiers included. Steven comforts her through this as she struggles to express her thoughts and feelings, but in the end she remains corrupted. For now. We of course knew about corruption, but I believe this was our first time really getting into the nitty-gritty details of it all. She's never really given much screen time again after this, and I don't think that can just be chalked up to some time restrictions, given the show had 5 seasons, a movie, and a spin-off. Now, I never watched Steven Universe Future because, honestly, I had a lot of negative thoughts following the original series finale. But from what I've heard and found through my own research, Nephrite is present and cured of her corruption, but she is simply a background character. The main story of Steven Universe Future follows Steven as he slowly becomes corrupted himself. So having the two of them speak or having her there in that moment where everyone is hugging him would have been nice, as she could have been there for him like he was for her all those years ago. I think it's very sad that these characters serve their purpose to the story and are completely sidelined, or their disability is just never brought up again. Someone's disability doesn't need to be brought up every time they're on screen, but it should be written in a way where it has genuine impact on the story and how they are portrayed. Avoiding stereotypes like these is essential when it comes to representation. Another important factor to consider when writing disabled characters is inclusion. Disabled characters shouldn't feel separate from the rest of the cast, they should feel like a natural addition. There's a specific series that I feel does this very well, and that's South Park. I know that may come as a surprise considering South Park is notorious for its controversial and raunchy humor, but I must say, it has some of my favorite disabled representation I've ever seen. South Park has 2 very specific characters I'd like to talk about today, Timmy Birch and Jimmy Valmer. Let's start with Timmy. Timmy first appears in the season 4 premiere, The Tooth Fairy's Tots 2000. This episode aired April 5th of 2000, so at the time, it was a bit controversial to have a visibly disabled character on television. The network worried that it would be offensive to portray a mentally handicapped child, but Matt Stone and Trey Parker pushed for it, claiming that he was treated just like the other kids so it wouldn't be offensive. There's more to Timmy than just his disability, and that's what makes him such good representation. Timmy has cerebral palsy, so he uses an electric wheelchair and has limited speech. He mostly communicates using his own name, but there are exceptions such as when he adopts Gobbles the turkey. There's a specific episode I love in which the boys are told that to go to heaven, you need to confess your sins, but this makes them realize Timmy can't confess his sins. All he can say is Timmy. And so the boys try to baptize him to make sure he doesn't go to hell. It's a very sweet episode to me, There are also several other examples where they include Timmy just like the other kids, but I won't get into all of that today. Timmy isn't the only boy in town with cerebral palsy. Jimmy Vollmer also has it, but unlike Timmy, he uses crutches to walk. He does have a speech impediment, but it's a stutter rather than selective mutism. Jimmy is treated just like his fellow classmates and is even popular amongst them, never being excluded due to his disabilities. In the South Park Pandemic special, we even see that he grows up to be this universe's next Jimmy Fallon, basically, hosting a late-night show and being beloved by people all over the world. He is treated no differently for his disability, plus him and Timmy have a very sweet friendship. Portraying characters like Jimmy and Timmy in a very similar light as their peers is exactly what makes them such good representation. Their disability impacts their day-to-day life, yes, but at the same time, it doesn't define them. Having bare minimum representation isn't enough anymore. We need positive representation in the shows we watch. I want these characters to have a genuine impact on the viewers and for disabled people to find comfort in them. Now, before we go through a few characters I think are just really amazing representation, I'd like to list off some honorable mentions. Characters who I think succeed in what they're trying to be, but I just didn't have time to talk about today. I'd always be willing to make individual videos about some of these characters though, if you guys were interested enough. Pink Pearl from Steven Universe, who is missing her left eye. Z from Total Drama, the 2023 version. He has a congenital amputation and uses a prosthetic leg. Amaya from The Dragon Prince is deaf and uses sign language to communicate. Frankie Stein from Monster High Gen 3 uses a prosthetic leg. Della Duck from DuckTales has lost her left leg and uses a prosthetic. Yuki from A Sign of Affection is deaf and uses sign language to communicate. Scootaloo from My Little Pony has a developmental disorder affecting her wing growth, resulting in them being much smaller than the average pony. Gary Godspeed from Final Space, who lost his arm and uses a prosthetic. Loop from Hazbin Hotel lost her arm, and I'm gonna assume we'll be seeing her with a prosthetic in season 2. Natalie from Miraculous Ladybug has a degenerative disorder from using the Peacock Miraculous. Also from Miraculous Ladybug is Tomoe Tsurugi, who is blind. Captain Grimes from Amphibia is missing his left eye and lost his left arm. Del Clawthorne from the Owl House is missing his left eye and has a hand tremor. Also from the Owl House is Principal Bump, who uses a palisman to help him see as he's visually impaired. There are a bunch more I'm missing, so if I didn't mention a disabled character you enjoy, comment them down below please. I would love to check them all out. Now, here are some of my favorite examples of representation. Starting off, we have Shoko from Silent Voice, who is deaf and uses sign language to communicate. She is from a beautiful movie that focuses on her childhood bully as he reconnects with her and learns sign language to, in a way, atone for his past. She's one of the main protagonists in this film and shows the real struggles people with disabilities have to go through, even attempting to take her own life eventually. I feel very seen watching this movie, and it never fails to bring me to tears, even though I myself am not deaf. Next, we have Fizzaroli from Hell of a Boss, a burn victim who lost all 4 of his limbs in a fire, so he has prosthetics. He utilizes these in his work as an entertainer, creating fun visuals and elaborate dances that an able-bodied person wouldn't be able to do. I love to see characters utilize their disabilities in creative ways, especially when it allows them to outdo able-bodied folk. Next up, we have Ida from the Owl House. Now, Ida has 2 disabilities: the Owl Beast curse, as well as becoming an amputee in the season 2 finale, but today we'll focus on her curse. Ida's curse is such beautiful representation. As someone who's always been disabled, I'm quite content with the situation I find myself in, but I can only imagine how hard it would be to be born able-bodied, only to later become disabled. It reminds me of that phrase, is it better to have loved and lost than never have loved at all? I wonder. Ida was cursed in her early teen years by her own sister Lilith. This curse transforms Ida into an owl beast, losing control over herself when this happens. Now, she can tame this curse using potions and elixirs, but not taking them for even a short period of time will quickly result in her transforming once again. Over the course of the series, we watch Ida struggle as she fights this curse, but eventually her sister Lilith takes half of the curse on, resulting in both of them losing their ability to do magic. As I said earlier, these are witches in a world of magic. Not being able to do magic is pretty inconvenient. Eventually though, Ida comes to terms with her situation and learns to accept her disability, which in turn makes her stronger through her harpy form. Oh, she also loses an arm, eventually. Hooray! Anyways, Ida is great representation and shows the struggles disabled people may go through to accept their circumstances. Building off of that, Lilith goes through a similar arc, learning to cope with her curse through the use of elixirs in the epilogue. She's shown to have accepted it through her harpy form as well, and it was nice to see both of them go through different stages of grief when it came to being disabled and how they coped differently from one another. Moving on, we have Finn from Adventure Time, who lost his arm during the series, eventually using a prosthetic. As I've said before, I love when disabled characters are badass. And what better way to be a badass than to kick ass? Finn is awesome, dare I say 1,000 times cooler after losing the arm. Not only does a very deep and meaningful story in the show stem from Finn losing his arm, but we also see him grow as a man and struggle with this change. having to adapt his fighting style to suit his new situation. Something I love is how across the various universes we see throughout the series, Finn is consistently missing his arm. Being disabled isn't just something that happens to people, it's part of who they are. For me, my disability is part of what makes me the person I am, and the same goes for Finn. His disability doesn't define him, but it does help shape who he is as a person. Anyways, Finn is great, and I hope we see more of him in the second season of Fiona and Cake. Now I'm gonna be completely honest. I have not watched Avatar: The Last Airbender. Ooh. I know. It's bad. It's probably one of the best animated series of all time, and I somehow haven't sat down to finally watch it. But even without seeing it, I can confidently say that Toph is some of the best representation I've ever seen. From what I do know, while avoiding spoilers, she's one of the main characters from season 2 on, and uses her blindness to her advantage when fighting. Her blindness is joked about, but it seems that it's done by her typically, such as a scene I've seen floating about online where they're looking for something and she's like, "There it is!" and then waves her hand over her eyes because, duh, she's freaking blind. I think Toph truly embodies what I like to see in a disabled character, as she is strong, badass, and uses her disability to do things able-bodied people may not be able to do, or not as well as she does. Overall, she's just a really fun character. I've never even watched the show and she's still one of my favorites. I mean, come on. Now, last but not least, Kaori. Kaori holds a special place in my heart. I know I already touched upon her story earlier, but I just want to talk about her one more time. She's a young girl suffering from Friedreich's ataxia, a disease that causes the body to grow weaker to the point in which victims may lose the ability to walk and develop a loss of control over their arms and legs. Throughout the series, we watch as she battles this disease, getting physical therapy and extensive care, eventually undergoing a risky surgery. I watched Your Lie in April shortly after getting bad news regarding my own health. I was Kaori's age when I watched the show, and she gave me a lot of hope that I too would be okay and be able to pursue my dreams. This was until she inevitably passed away from her illness, which devastated me as a teenager and left me in a really bad place for several months as I questioned, why was I born this way? What had I done to deserve the fate I have? But it also helped me come to terms with my own disability. Overall, Kaori is my favorite form of representation I've ever seen because she truly showed the dark side that most don't want to talk about. Overall, I think disabled representation has come a long way over the years, and there are so many characters I've talked about today that I love. All I can hope for is that we continue to get more characters who represent the disabled community in a positive way. I hope y'all enjoyed this video. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and if you agreed or disagreed with anything I said, so please feel free to leave a comment. Anyways, thank you all for watching. I hope you all have a wonderful day or night, and if you're watching this just before bed, sleep tight. Bye!